I'm Alethea Steingisser. I worked at the Infographics Lab with Jim Meacham at the Department of Geography at the University of Oregon for over 12 years. I do cartography and project management, mostly large atlas projects. Caroline Rose works at the University of Wisconsin at the Geological Survey, where she does GIS and cartography. And Lauren Tierney is a graphics reporter and cartographer at the Washington Post. So we are the first all-female editorial team that the Atlas has had. We're also the first team that didn't have a returning editor. So I think we were really left in good hands, though, by our past editors, particularly the visionary work of Daniel Huffman and Tim Wallace, who were the founders of this project, who left us with a really practical foundation and really good documentation, which we've continued to improve for future teams. So we're going to talk a bit about our experience making this atlas. So I'll talk a little bit and then we'll switch off. So the atlas, how does it start? It really starts as a vision. And like other volumes, the atlas, the purpose of the atlas is really to showcase outstanding cartographic design that illustrates the variety, the breadth, and the depth of what we all do. So this book reaches far beyond the people in this room and beyond this organization, and reaches people who don't think about maps so much. So it's exciting to think about it serving as an ambassador for cartography to show what we do. It showcases the power of a well-designed map to communicate, to make a difference, to inspire, and to inform. So thinking about that vision, the next thing we do is we open up submissions, and we receive a giant bucket of maps from all of you. So how many people submitted maps to the Atlas of Design Volume 4 in this room? I did. Awesome. So this was a record-breaking year. We received more volumes than more submissions than any other volume in the past. And once we get those submissions, we have a panel of judges, and the map selection is guided by those panel of judges. We have judges here in the room, and one, couple. And they spend a lot of hours scoring these maps and going through them. But the final decision of what gets published in the Atlas really lies on the editorial team. And that was, we really thought that would be a quicker process than it was. It was a really time-consuming process. And part of that is because we talked a lot about what a map is. We thought, okay, we'll just get these numbers and we'll probably agree with them, but we really scoured through these submissions. It made us think really deeply about maps. What is a map? Does it need a landmass? Does it define place? Can I locate it in the world? So this process it was really enjoyable, but also very time-consuming and sometimes very tedious. But I think it was, something we hadn't really thought about. Thought that we weren't expecting that. So this is one of the example a submission that we had that we deliberated about in our judging process. This is the North Cascades collaboration by Jason Curtis and Nikki Frumkin. And this one exists sort of in a gray area. So we talked about this one a lot. It's part art piece. So it's a watercolor painting of a landscape. But it's also part reference map. So it has labeling these different mountain peaks and the relative location of the features to one another. Thinking about, is this a map? What is it? What do I learn from it? I think, we decided in the end to include it. We loved it, and we thought it was a beautiful example of a map made by manual methods that really taught us about this place. And that idea or that decision will fall on a different side of the line for everybody. It's just, it's unavoidably subjective, and it really differs by person, by context, and by the purpose of the map. So thinking about categories of different types of maps, Lauren's going to speak more to the maps we received and the maps we included in the book.
Yeah, so while we were going through all the maps, we were kind of thinking, what's kind of the breakdown of the types of maps we're getting? Are we getting more reference maps? Are we getting more fantasy maps? What are some of the underrepresented map submissions that very few people, types of maps that very few people are submitting? And so we were really curious about what methods people are using, what topics or themes are represented by the maps and the final medium of the map. And so what we did is we ended up going through the over 300 submissions and categorizing them to take a look at a couple of these areas. So one area we looked at was the methodology. And granted, this is based off of our interpretation of the map, not something that the submitters had submitted in. So this was us taking a look at the submissions. And unsurprisingly, the large majority were digitally rendered. So we considered this anything that was that had some sort of digital had some sort of component that was clearly used digital methods for. And then following that in much smaller categories were hand-drawn maps, and then art maps, which we considered more of those more sculptures, more kind of physical maps, and then the 3D digital methods, so more 3D perspective. So one example that made it into the atlas for more 3D methods was this piece by the National Park Service. And then one that we considered more in this art category was this sculpture map of housing prices in San Francisco. Another area we took a look at was the type of map, so thematic versus reference. And was thematic versus reference. So this was one that was kind of surprising, was the majority of the maps we received were actually reference maps. So wide variety, outdoor hiking reference, basic reference, transportation. But it wasn't a much smaller number that were thematic, but majority were reference maps. So one example that made it in the atlas was this tactile map of Switzerland that fell into the reference category, and another map that made it into the Atlas of Design was this map of South Carolina historic rainfall, which is more telling a story with thematic data. Another breakdown we took a look at was themes. So again, a majority of the maps were general reference, so those were considered, they weren't a reference map that kind of had like a focus like a hiking reference map or a biking reference map. These were just general overview reference maps. And then you can see a breakdown of some of the other categories. And some of the maps definitely could have fallen into multiple of these categories, but we just took what seemed to be the most prominent, the prominent theme for the maps and took a look. And a couple of the maps that made it into the atlas was this one by Alberto Lucas Lopez, and that fell into more of the cultural category. And then in the more representing historic places or history was this map of map of historic U.S. boundaries. And then this map was one of the examples that fell into the fantasy category that made it into the atlas, Skinara, the Land Beyond the Sea. And then the last area we took a look at was, how many of the maps getting submitted were originally print and how many were designed for digital, and also how many were more kind of art pieces. And again, this kind of fell into that sculpture area as well. So definitely a bit of overlap in this. But one of the maps that made it into the atlas was this map by Laris Karklis for the Washington Post. So it was produced for a digital audience. And for the future, one of the things we're thinking about is maybe when people submit their maps is having a little form to see how they would categorize their maps so that we have a better understanding of, who's submitting what types of, or the types of maps that are submitted, and, maybe if that's changing over time if we track that. So, and now I'm going to have Alethea come up again to talk a little bit about how we put together the book.
Right. So once we made all these selections, we had to think about how to lay these out. And one of the challenges for this book is it's a collection of maps that were not made for this size book. So some things were designed for the screen, some things were designed for a paper publication, and other things were posters. So the original size really determined if people got extra pages or not. I keep hitting the wrong button here. So some of the maps were designed for book publications, and those fit really nicely on a 2-page spread. This one, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it in French, but it's by a French group, Le Monde, and Who Owns the Arctic, showing political tensions in the Arctic region. The Range and Migration of King Eaters by our own Daniel Huffman, produced for the Ecological Atlas. Charles Peppernow's How Deep is Dark Star, which shows a remote mountain cave system in Uzbekistan, and this was designed for the National Geographic magazine. So those all fit really nicely. I didn't have to work very hard to make them fit beautifully. But then we had something like Daniel Coe's Glacial Landforms of the Puget Lowland. If you haven't seen this, it's in the map gallery. It's gorgeous. But I think he designed it, the original size was 3 feet by 3 feet. So he had used LiDAR data, which is really detailed, to show the detail on these glacial landforms. And we could not see, you can't really highlight the texture and the beauty of this map without doing an extra spread. So we did an extra full 2-page enlargement of this map and showing it here just to show you some of the detail and those beautiful, the striations you can see from that LiDAR data. So he ended up getting 2 spreads. The first page, we showed the context of the full layout. The second page, an enlargement. And we did this often, where we tried to include the full layout of somebody's work before we showed a blow-up. I think in most cases we did. Another example, a similar challenge, was Bill Marsh's bird's eye view of historic Philadelphia. And I don't know what size this was made for, but it's pretty large. So we did, on his, again, we did it enlargement on an additional few pages to show that really intricate detail of not just the buildings and the cityscape, but you can see the windows of the buildings. And this thing is gorgeous. So if you haven't seen it yet, come take a look in the atlas. Lastly, we had images of map objects. So things that were never designed to be printed and put on a piece of paper. Heather Smith's Annapolis River. You may have seen her talk at PCD about her tracing rivers and freeway systems. This is a woodcut she did, which is 6 feet long. So we used a really non-traditional layout for this to really emphasize the width of the piece on the top with an enlargement at the bottom. And I just included another enlargement so you can really see it and see how gorgeous it is. So we all had different roles in creating this atlas. I was really in charge of the layout, coordinating content, and working with the authors and with the copy editor. And Caroline's going to speak more to how we shared the workload. If I could push the right button, that is.
Okay. So when submissions closed, everything really accelerated for producing this atlas. The 3 of us were all working in parallel, all doing, drawing on different skill sets and all learning the details of separate aspects of the project. And this is just a tiny sample of different tasks that we had to do and different roles that we took on during the process. While we were putting together the work to produce this book, we were also getting orders in, and we saw steady but very slow growth for a couple of months. And we planned to close pre-orders originally in the middle of August, but then we saw the impact of some articles featuring the project, as well as NACIS registration opening in the middle of, right there in the middle of August. And we saw pre-orders nearly double in one day and reach about 1,300 by the time we had to put in a press order. So that's more than we've printed of any previous volume. Just the number of pre-orders is more than has ever been printed of a previous volume. So we were able to actually go back to the NACIS board and request to get more money, spend more money to increase our originally planned press run by quite a bit. So thank you for pre-ordering if you did, because then we were able to print more books. And speaking of the previous atlases, there is an effort being led by Daniel to reprint the first 3 atlases. So we need at least 600 commitments to reprint any one of these volumes. And this was our status update as of October 12th. So hopefully these numbers have gone up since then, since we've been publicizing the project here. at NACIS, and once we hit 600, we'll be able to think about funding another reprint. So please go to atlasofdesign.org/reprint to make more copies available. We really want to thank the NACIS community for being the drivers of this project. For instance, in this Twitter conversation, Hans encouraged Mike Hall to submit some of his work for the Atlas, and his map of Spain was actually featured in Volume 4. So this kind of community engagement has been super essential throughout the entire project. Really like to thank the contributors as well. And I've highlighted here the people who, I may have missed someone, I'm not sure, but the people who are here at NACIS right now, of our cartographers and our judges. So, oops, I'll stay on there. This was a lot of work, but at the end of the project, the best part is that we've had a chance to collaborate with so many inspiring people. And in the end, we produced this beautiful book. The experience was really rewarding because of that. So thank you, and we would love to take questions about the process.
What was your anticipated press run versus what did you do?
We originally planned 1,500 when we first put together the budget, and then we pushed it up to about 2,000. And that's what we think are going to be the final number for this print. Yeah.
We thought 1,500 was high.
Yes.
A lot about it.
Because Volume 2 printed roughly 1,200, and they had trouble selling them all at that time, and they still had some left to sell by the time Volume 3 came out. So we thought 1,500 was ambitious at the very beginning, and it's going to sell out. So.
Any thought or way that you could go to print on the
Ooh.
at least for like reruns?
That's been a conversation for a while, right?
It has. And if I could get that, I mean, there's been, things are improving in print on demand, but we want something that's substantive, very high quality, binding, and that's still not something you can get. And you can't necessarily get it at a very reasonable price point. Print on demand, even if we put the same kind of size together, cheaper materials, it's still going to cost probably $80. We want this to be accessible.
For the layout issues, whenever you have a map that's a totally different size and scale, not look, do you consult with the original cartographer about what their desires are or how they would have that?
We did an initial layout first, and then once the copy edit was done, we sent the page layout back to the cartographer for their feedback. So in ones where the detail really wasn't, you weren't able to see it, we almost always gave them another page and blew it up, and that really drove what got an additional page. There was one person who asked us to move something over to one side of the map or the other because what was discussed in the essay was on the other side. But I think for the most part, people were very happy with how we split this out.
But there was a lot of back and forth with
There was a lot of them.
everyone. We sent it back to them. We got feedback from them, whether it was that looks great or how about we try.
Yeah, and I thought that was important, part of the process, because a lot of times when someone else is going to publish your work, they don't give you the opportunity to review it before they publish it. So we gave them the opportunity not only to review the layout, but to review their essay after it was copy edited.
I don't know if it would be really useful, but I think it would be very interesting to ask people things like how do you categorize your map. I think it's interesting. I mean, working at things like the entry map exhibition, the way people describe their own maps is often the way that I would describe them. But I think it would be very interesting if you ask people to categorize. I think you can also give them the categories.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Essentially, like the way we kind of thought about it is maybe like when you renew your NACIS membership and you have like, what are you interested in? And you have like unlimited little check boxes, kind of something maybe similar to that. So, but yeah, that's a very good point.
One more quick question.
So, yeah, how's it feel?
Good. Feels very good. Very close to each other. I think the day after that, Wild Migrations went to press, the day after is when I really started doing the layout on this heavily. So, yeah. So it's been a whirlwind of Atlas activity for a while. So it feels pretty good. All right, thank you, everyone.